So this is the situation you're in. You need an estimate for a new whatever it is. We don't know what it is. We just need a number. Can you get me that number in a day? And the answer is, of course, we can get you any numbers you want, but you know that the numbers are wrong. The whole idea of what we want to discuss now, and part of the reason for this course, is the fact that estimating requires a little bit more than just a guess. It requires a little bit more investment of time if you're going to be using those numbers for anything. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about cost estimating policy, why there's a change in how we do business and estimating and how we do business and scoping, and really kind of one of the drivers for the course. My name is Tom Glardner. I happen to be your cost engineer for the school. So you're welcome to contact me on any cost estimating questions from here on out, because I'm your lifelong educator. Let's talk a little bit about the policy. What I want to talk about is not just what is the policy. I also want to talk about some of the reasons behind it and what's driving this thing. Because if you don't understand why this is happening, then you may not be prepared to embrace the changes that are coming down the road. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of estimates that you'll run into out there. And most of all, I really want you to realize that you have a role in this. Wherever you're sitting, you have a role in the success of our business, and that success is based upon accurate estimates. So we're going to start off with why we're here, why we're having the changes, talk a little bit about that value portion of that objective. Then we're going to get into laying out the policy. That's what you want to know. What's the policy? What do we got to do? Then we'll get into some of the definitions and some of what estimates are and what different types of methods are out there. But first, let's start off with why are we here? This dates back to a number of different studies. We've got a couple of audits that are out there. There's still audits ongoing. There's audits that were just published this last year. And they've all shown the same. I could spend an hour telling you what all the audits say, and they all say the same things. Over half of our estimates are unreasonably inaccurate. They're off by more than, we'll find out, 25% is the limit for accuracy. And they're off by more than 25%. And by the way, that doesn't mean 26, 27%. That means there's some that are 50%, 100%, 150%. I saw one that's 800% wrong. They're way off. And when you go to our project managers and say, hey, here's the DD Form 1391 with the estimate on it, where'd you get those numbers? The vast majority of them can't show any kind of support. There's nothing behind those numbers. Those numbers are just numbers on a piece of paper. There's no reason why they're there. And again, that's shown all the way down through a number of different audits. In 2018, the Government Accountability Office, that's the GAO, if you're not familiar with them, they are the audit agency of the federal government. They documented that all of DoD is doing this poorly. They came up with the same results, all right, same things, and they basically directed DoD to change this, fix it. Which is why you're seeing policy, not just in the Air Force, but you're also going to see policy in the DoD that talks about accuracy of our estimates and documentation and things like that. So this is a big train a coming, folks. It's not somebody out there who's just kind of beating on the drum. This is a join or get out of the way kind of thing. See, here's the problem. You've heard about this thing called the IPL, the Integrated Priority List. It's the list of literally thousands of projects that are coming up each year that people want to get money for. And theoretically, it makes sense that you'd have a prioritized list of projects, which ones are more important based upon mission and scoring and all things like that. And when you get your budget, you somehow draw a line and say, okay, we can afford these, we can't afford those. So you folks go off and do good things, and you folks come back next year or whenever, however we're going to manage that list. But here's the problem. What if I were to tell you that over half of these projects are off by more than 25%? And remember, I'm not talking about 26%. I'm going to talking about 27%. I'm talking about like 100 to 150%. How can we manage this list? As you can imagine, all of a sudden there's a whole swath of projects here. I have no idea whether they're going to go or not. And I'm pulling from the list down here in June, July, calling up people saying, can you execute? Can you execute? Or I'm going up here and deferring projects in the middle of the year saying, sorry, I know that you were planning, but we had to take your project to pay for somebody else. And Congress's idea is, wait a minute, you told me that this project at Onizuka, that's a mission priority. and you're deferring it because King Salmon needs some money? That doesn't make sense. That you're not managing things based upon. Is this managing you, or are you managing it? So the real emphasis is getting accurate estimates and getting accurate scopes to get those estimates in order to be able to then make sure that we're able to manage our programs. So let's see what the policy is. First thing is this whole accuracy thing. This comes out of a law. The law states that projects that are reported to or authorized by Congress can't vary by more than 25% without going back to Congress and reappropriating and reapproving. And this actually funnels back down and through our policies that say the same thing. So if we have a project that busts the 25%, you've got to stop work, drop tools, and you can't go forward until you get it reapproved. Or there's some other programming thresholds here, and here, come back to the programming course, we'll talk about those. But the bottom line of this whole page is that budgetary accuracy is defined by your ability to meet 25%. Now, you may have some folks, some senior folks, some wizened, gray-haired folks who've been around in the squadron for some time who are going to say, there's no way that we can do 25%. This whole thing is just, and I'm going to tell you, having worked in the commercial world, some of you have worked in the commercial world, 25%, you don't survive in the commercial world with 25% accuracy. You've got to be under 5% accuracy in the budgetary range if you're going to survive. There's no contractor who bids with 25% accuracy. You're just not going to be in business anymore. And so this whole thing that we basically allowed ourselves to get sloppy, folks. That's what's happening. See, here's what happens if you break that 25%. Okay, again, you got to stop work because you no longer have an approved project. You've got to pursue the reapprovals. If Congress was involved or if the air staff was involved, you've got to go up. Your base civil engineer's got to have a phone call with the Air Force civil engineer and the Secretary of the Air Force, IEE, that's Mr. Carell, and that's General Allen. He's got to have a conversation with them to explain what happened and what did you do so it never happens again. And it's unacceptable. I mean, everybody understands that there's manpower issues. We all understand that. We also understand that there's time issues. Those are constraints. You have to work within those constraints. So going up there and saying, I didn't have enough manpower, didn't have enough time, they're not accepting that as an answer. How to work within those constraints. What happens when the customer decides to change their mind? Who's in charge of this project? All right, so those are the things that they're focusing on because in the end, they're the ones paying the bill. And so if they're paying the bill, they consider themselves in charge. So in the end, this is not a small thing that this is happening. This is why Congress is getting involved because they're tired of the fact that they've lost confidence in our submission. So the policy states, and this is the new AFI that just came out, the policy states, if it's MILCON or UMMC, that's the unspecified minor military construction, we used to call that P341. So it all comes out of the MILCON budget. All MILCON and UMMC must be estimated by an estimator who's graduated from 400 because you can't get access to PACES without coming through 400. And it's got to be using a parametric estimating system such as PACES or something equivalent. And there are other DoD equivalents. For example, the Army uses M2, but in the Air Force, we use PACES. And it's got to be at a Class 3 parametric level of accuracy. Now, if it's any other appropriated fund project, if it exceeds $1 million, then the same things hold true. It's got to be estimated by a parametric estimating system to a Class 3 level of accuracy, and you can't get access to PACES without having graduated WENG 400. Not this course, but 400. Now, then, if it's beyond the basis approval authority, and what's beyond basis approval authority? Well, any MILCON and UMMC basically goes to Congress anyway, so it's beyond basis approval authority. And any other appropriated fund project that exceeds repair of $5 million or minor construction of $1.8 million. No, those are just base approval authorities. Now, if it exceeds the base approval authority, then somebody who's an independent reviewer and approver who's got a certification will have to review and approve this project. Now, I don't know how high fidelity your monitor is. or if you've got the slides in front of you printed to color. But there are a couple of things on this slide that are in different colors, okay? So you're going to notice that the $1 million is bold and in blue. And then this whole bottom line here, this review and approval, is in blue. I want to emphasize this because, again, those old Joes, those folks like myself who've been around for more than 30 years, are going to sit and grumble and talk about all this new policy and how it's changing the way we do business. Everything on this slide that's in black is old policy, folks. Been around forever. This stuff up here in the MilCon and the UMMC has been around since I was a second lieutenant. This stuff here has been around since 2012 because we've been doing that parametric estimating for APF projects since 2012. The only things that change with the most recent publication is they dropped this number from 5 million to 1 million. All right, so that's new. They dropped it from 5 million to 1 million, and they've added this review and approval, which is not even on the base level. I mean, bases are not even having to answer this question. This is a higher headquarters question. And we'll see how that is implemented in the new business rules. But I want to emphasize that the folks out there, when they start worrying about how this is a change in the way we do, there's not a whole lot of change in the way we should have been doing business all along. The policy already supported the proper way of doing business. What we're doing is we're now checking over that project process and verifying that it's happening. So that's the policy. We're moving right on through this, folks. Let's talk about what kind of estimates you might run into and what are estimates and what that means. All right, this is a buddy of mine who used to teach with me here at the school. He's now off in the commercial world, but he always used to say that cost estimating is a wild guess carried out to 2 decimal places. And there's some sense of humor in that because we know that at some point cost estimating is a prediction. In fact, that's what part of the definition I gave here. It's a predict the future cost. The whole idea is that you're going to do some sort of evaluation of the future, analyzation, and then you're going to come up with what you think the future cost will be. And we understand that there's a certain amount of accuracy that you have to deal with in that. It's both an art and a science. Now, if you come back to the WENG 400 course, I'm going to teach you how to go to the cost data and do all the adjustments and the markups and divide by the square root of your birthday and add your shoe size, and out will come a cost. And that's the science of estimating. And it's a good science, and it's a good start. But we also have to recognize that there's an art form to this, and that is knowing what's going on in your environment, knowing what the market conditions are, understanding the methods of construction, and making sure that you got the right things in the estimate, and making sure that you're capturing all the unusual circumstances of the estimate. And this requires a wide range of disciplines. It's not a one-person job. It's a team sport. I mean, you and I each bring different skills to the table. You could be 30 years working in the shops, working in the ops flight, working even with engineering flight, working with projects. You've got all this experience, and yet you still have a limitation to that experience. And I've been working for 30-something years as well, and I've got limitations to my experience. So we need to have a team sport here. Now, we estimate as though we're a prudent and well-equipped contractor. This comes out of the FAR. This also comes out of the Unified Facilities Criteria. And what that means is if your contract costs are going to be such and such, we need to make sure we capture those. You need to think like a contractor. You need to think about how things go up, just like you need to think about what goes in there. You need to be as accurate as possible based upon the best information and update your estimate throughout the project. And this is probably one of the things we're most guilty about. We throw a number on the table and then we don't update it until we absolutely have to, which means that we've got a contract bid in hand and all of a sudden we realize that we're off by a whole lot. Rather than as we go through the design, as we go throughout the project development, we find out that we're going to be changing things, we should be updating it throughout the whole process. Now, we often have consultants prepare estimates, and that's all right. You can have a consultant prepare your estimate. One thing you should be looking for is that consultant qualified to prepare an estimate. You know, we often look at a consultant like an architect engineer firm and say, well, do you have a structural engineer on your team? Do you have a mechanical engineer on your team to be able to handle this? And how are you going to do that? Have you got some sort of joint venture with a mechanical engineering firm? How are you dealing with the landscaping? Or if this is involving an aquatics feature like a pool or something, do you have aquatics engineering? Do we ever ask them if they've got qualified cost engineers on their team? They've got to comply with all the same submission requirements that we have to comply with, and they have to certify their results. And we have a responsibility to review their submission. Even if it's not required from one of those formal reviewer approval roles, all estimates require independent reviews. So if something's prepared by an architect engineer firm, let me back up. You are accountable according to the FAR and according to the UFC. So if they provide an estimate, our job is to confirm what they've done, validate the quantities, make sure that they're going down the right road, because architect engineer firms will provide to us what they think we want to have. And if we tell them that it's by gum going to be this price, they often will make sure that it fits that price, whether that's reasonable or not. So go back through and validate their stuff. Again, your estimates and your background is going to limit what you can provide to this. Now, that's not to say you don't have valuable parts to this. You've got technical discipline that you're bringing to the table. That's why you're here. You've got an experience base. You've got what you've worked on. You understand what the purpose of this, what it's doing for you. And the idea is that not only enables you to be a part of this process, but also limits you. So you need to think about how you're going to overcome those limits. And the best way to overcome those limits is that it's a team approach. When I used to work in the ops flight and deal with the planners, one of the things I realized that, it was better than in the engineering flight, and I've worked in both, the ops planners know how to work together as a team far better than some of the engineers do. And the reason is because they realize that the mechanical guy coming from the mechanical shops knows that he can't deal with the electrical systems like the electrical guy can. So they tend to work together as a team. We always kick things around, have each other review things, and we build upon that experience. All right, so I've talked about why we're here, why this is important. I've talked about what the policy is, and I've talked about some general definitions. Let's talk about the 3 types of estimating and how they go together. Here's a situation. You're in a staff meeting, some sort of meeting, and they're talking about an issue. Like, for example, this is work on a work request on a particular facility, but whatever the situation is. And somebody looks at one of the more experienced people and says, how much is that going to cost? And that shop chief or that experienced person rolls her eyes back in the head and says, $50,000. Yeah, we can do this in-house. Now the question is that a cost estimate? And I guess you would call it a cost estimate because they just estimated something, didn't they? But really, is it useful? How much can you trust that answer? Is it going to be right? What would happen after you read the scenario? What would happen if I told you, all right, they went off and did this, and at the end, what this actually costs is $100,000? Would you be stunned? Would you be surprised? What happens if I said at the end they did this and it actually cost about $35,000? Would you be stunned? Now you may be pleased, but you would probably not be completely stunned that would happen. And the reality is we realize that this thing is, in the end, an educated guess, right? It's not an estimating method. That's actually called a WAG, which in the Air Force is an acronym, Wild Assumed Guess. We don't do those things. So I'm going to teach you the 3 methods of estimating that we do. There's these different classes. And I would tell you, by the way, let me give you a hint. If you were to take away the one thing from this whole lesson, this chart is it. And the reason is the Air Force thinks it's so important that you distinguish between the methods and the purposes that you're generating those estimates for and make sure that they stay in their lanes. So we're going to start off with the Class 5 estimate. It is for planning purposes. That means we're thinking down the road. Do we do this here or do we do it there? What year might we put this thing in? And area development plans, installation development plans, that kind of thing. We're doing some long-range planning, and we need a number. Now, there's no mandated accuracy for this, but we know very little about the project. So we generate something called a square foot, square meter estimate. And you're familiar with this because if you've ever bought a house or watched those home shows, you've had a realtor come in and say, here's how much it's going to cost per square foot. Well, that's a square foot, square meter estimate. It takes you a very short time to generate the estimate, but it's going to have a very low amount of accuracy. I mean, we know that these estimates are going to be wrong because we haven't done anything more than just kind of tell you how big the building is. But at least we got a number to kick around the table. Then there's this thing called Class 3 estimating. That's for programming. If you're going to go up for approval, for authority, for the money to do a project, you have to be statutorily within 25%. And within our policy, it says that as well, 25%. And the way you get there is you've got to develop the scope. You've got to have 15 to 30% programming definition in order to be able to generate that accuracy of that estimate. And that estimate's going to have to go through a different methodology. You can't get there with this square foot, square meter. You've got to do a parametric estimate, which basically means taking the building apart into its little pieces and estimating each one of those. That's going to take you some time. You can't do that in an hour. It's going to take you some days, but it will get you to that accuracy that you need. It's going to get you less than 25% accuracy on a good side. Then there's this Class 1 estimating method, and that's for contracting. That's when you're out to negotiate with the contractor. You got to sit across from them on the table, and you got to look at what you've got and look at what they're proposing to do and validate that it's accurate, that it's what you intend to contract. And you might be saying, no, we're not going to do 1,000 foot of cable to get it from the transformer to the pole right there. That's like 30 feet at the most. So, you know, those kind of negotiation things are going to happen. But you have to really know your project. You've got to have it detailed out. And the folks in the ops flight understand this the best because you develop things called bills of materials. So that's essentially having a good project definition. Again, it's detailed as the contractor per the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation. And the methodology we tend to go to is this thing called unit price method, which is how you deal with things when you plan out projects. You're actually counting out how many board feet, how many linear feet of wire, how many bags and nails, that kind of thing. But that estimate is going to take you some time. It will get you the accuracy that you need to be able to negotiate effectively, but it's going to take you some time. Now, the key thing with this chart is that the methodologies are meant for a specific accuracy requirement, and they're meant for certain purposes. And you need to link these these different columns in your head, which is why this chart is the one that you really want to take away with you. As I said before, there is this thing called the WAG. You've heard about the WAG before. It's also called, and it's got a number of different terms out there, order of magnitude. They call it ROM, as though some sort of acronym is going to give it some sort of distinction. Rough order of magnitude. They call it a SWAG, which means it's a scholarly WAG. In the end, it is a wild assumed guess. It's based upon gut feel, high margin for error, and it deceives your leadership when you start kicking those numbers around. So let's take a look at these three different methods. I'm just going to touch on them, and I'm really going to basically review what we already said on that chart. So here's this line that just basically comes off that chart. It's a Class 5 estimate for up to 5% project definition. It's got a very high range of inaccuracy, okay, if you will, and it's for planning purposes. So just a repeat of what we saw on the chart already. All you need to know to do a square foot, square meter estimate is the type of facility, the size of that facility, how many square feet or square meters, where it's going to be at, what base, all right, and then what's the date of the construction. And you're able to then generate the cost. It's very fast, very little input, anybody can do it. And this is probably the most exciting thing. Anybody can do this. Secretaries can do this. People who've never ever swung a hammer can do this. You know what the dangerous thing is? Anybody can do it. Realtors can do this, right? So that's the problem. It's inaccurate. It ignores what's inside the building. All we need to know is this box. We don't need to know what goes on inside. And it misleads leadership. See, here's again how your realtors will do things. They will go out to a house, and they will say, well, in this neighborhood, a 3-bedroom bungalow will cost you $230 a square foot. What they don't talk to you about, and they don't acknowledge, is that a 3-bedroom bungalow with 2 baths, or in this case, I think there's 3 or 4 baths in there, compared to a 3-bedroom bungalow with 1 bath, are completely different prices. Is this a carport or is this a garage? Completely different prices. Is there a major yard here, or we're right on the street corner? Is this major change in prices? Are we talking about an in-ground pool? A whole wide range of prices. See, let me explain this a little further. If we can imagine these 2 facilities here. Now, this happens to be a Fisher house. If you're not familiar with Fisher houses, they're like the Ronald McDonald houses on military bases. They're for families of wounded military members, and enables the families to have some place to stay and while the members recovering and things like that. They are decked out to the nines. They are very polished, and they're very well taken care of. Conversely, over here is something called a SWA hut, a Southwest Asia hut. It's basically a plywood shed. Now, both of these are residences. If you want to, on the grossest amount of imagination, they're both residences. So if I go into the cost data, and I have the same amount of square footage, and I put them in the same location, they're going to come up with the exact same price. Do you see a problem here? We have not even considered what goes on inside of these buildings. We just know we're building a residence at this location at this time. And as a result, they're going to come up with the same price. That's why this is so inaccurate. Great for planning purposes, not useful for programming. Now, comparatively, we've got this parametric estimating method. Again, class 3 estimating, and if you ask the question, is there a class 4, class 2? Yeah, there are. That's actually a commercial distinction. The class 1 through 5 is a commercial distinction for, or an international distinction for the accuracy of an estimate and the methodologies and all that other kind of stuff that goes on there. We're just relating it to the 3 main types of estimating that we do in the Air Force. So we're just going to focus on 1, 3, and 5, making things a little easier for everybody. But again, the same line we saw on the chart, this is for programming. You need to know a little bit about the project, and it gets us within that 25% accuracy. So again, parametric, basically you're taking the building apart into little parts. I'm going to look at the roof. I'm going to say what kind of roof we got here, what are the parameters that go into that, and then I'm going to come up with the price for the roof. Then I'm going to take a look at the bricks for the wall. I'm going to take a look at the foundations. I'm going to take a look at the doors. I'm going to take a look at the windows. I'm going to take a look at all the different components of the facility, and I'll come up with an estimate. It is accurate for the purposes of budgetary work. And it's moderately fast. You can get it done in less than a week as long as you have a developed scope. And you can do it with limited development. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot to get 15 to 30%. You basically get everybody around the table and agree with what you're going to do in this facility. And that may be the hardest thing to get your customer to agree to, but you got to get that before you can come up with a budget. But the negative is it will take some time and it will take some development. It's not a Friday afternoon thing. It's not something you can say, give me an hour and I'll get you a number. It requires also some knowledge. So it's not a newbie's job. It requires somebody with a little seasoning, with a little experience, and it requires probably a team activity because different people bring different perspectives to this. Then there's this unit price, also called sometimes the quantity takeoff estimating. It's that class 1 for the negotiations portion when if I'm negotiating with a contractor and I need an independent government estimate, this is the methodology to go to. This one, you break the work into its individual tasks. So I'm putting in a slab, I'm putting in, I'm stringing in a circuit. Those types of things you're going to break into each one of those tasks and break out all the materials and labor and equipment and all the quantities that go on with that, which means you really have to know what's going in there. You have to lay it out. And again, the folks in the operations flight are better prepared to do this kind of estimating because you understand bills and materials and you understand work schedules and things like that. It can be very accurate. You can negotiate with authority, but it really requires some time. And if you can't build it, you can't estimate it. So you really need to know what you're doing in this regard. And then again, as I said before, curiously, engineers are less prepared to do unit price estimating than craftsmen and technicians. You do it all the time. Work plans, bills of materials, contractor bids. This is what you guys do. But it requires somebody who understands how to make a spreadsheet dance. So I find in the cost estimating course that there are some technicians that come in who excel, and then there's some technicians who come in and who struggle, because you really have to have a math mind to make this work. So a real quick discussion of the policy and where we're at with it. We've talked about the policy requirements and why those policy requirements came out. So you're able to comprehend that and bring that to the rest of the folks that you're dealing with out there. Why are we doing this change in culture, if you will? And then we talked about the different types of estimates and their purpose and class and methodologies and accuracies. All of those things linked together, and I really emphasize that one chart kind of communicates all of it. So with that, again, if you have any questions about estimating, you're welcome to give me a call. And later on in the course, we're going to talk about some other methods of estimating for you to use.